You might recognize our next guest, a former Stanley Cup winner with the 1989 Calgary Flames, also won an Olympic gold medal. Mr. Theo Fleury joins us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
That's awesome. Now, before you made your way to Lethbridge, you actually stopped off at the Remand Center in Medicine Hat. What were you doing there? What was going on?
Well, I set an intention a long time ago that I would love to be able to have the opportunity to go into prisons and speak to sort of the forgotten people in society, because they're part of the cycle of trauma, they're part of the cycle of abuse, and you know, hurt people, right? And it has been an absolutely amazing experience to go and see these guys in their most vulnerable places. And I think the thing that they have taught me the most is they've taught me about compassion. And I don't think we teach enough compassion in the world. I don't think we are very forgiving of one another. And yeah, it's every time I get to go, it's an amazing experience. And the other day in Medicine Hat was an amazing experience as well.
So you come to Lethbridge for the Bridges of Hope fundraising gala. You've been involved with this for a little while. How did you get involved with them?
Well, let's see. We do tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of speaking all over North America, and it's kind of like first come, first serve, and they contacted us a while ago and asked us if we would come and speak, and here we are.
That's amazing. Now, you're also an author of a couple of books, Playing with Fire and Conversations with a Rattlesnake. They really encourage open sharing and provide people with some tools. Mm-hmm. But Theo, what kind of tools?
Well, I think you need to find your own tools, right? You know, we always make suggestions or things that have worked for me and whatnot. But at the end of the day, when you put yourself in a place where you say, I need help, now I can help you. But if you don't want help, I can't help you, right? Because we're always going to be butting heads, or I'm going to get frustrated with you, you're going to get frustrated with me. And so the only thing at the end of the day you can do is take care of yourself. And what I always find is that it's the law of attraction rather than the law of promotion. And that's the way it's been for me, because, you know, I started out on this healing journey, I don't know, probably 20 years ago. And as I got better, people noticed, they saw that things were changing in my life, and then they would come to me and say, man, you look good, or what have you done, you know? And now that gives me that opportunity to now say, well, I did this, and this, and this is what happened to me, and this is how I felt, and this is what was going on, and so, you know, that's the kind of conversation that we've started, and it hasn't stopped. So it's been amazing.
Now, speaking of healing, and you know, let's talk a bit about what you went through when you were younger. Graham James, you know, the sexual abuse you and Sheldon Kennedy endured when you played in the WHL. Now, do you think the reason why you got into the drugs and the booze was to numb a lot of the pain that you suffered?
Absolutely.
When you were younger?
Yeah. I don't like it when people call it an addiction. I call it was a coping mechanism which helped me survive my emotional pain and suffering and the scars that were left behind, not only from Graham James, but if you even go further, you know, both my parents struggled with their own addictions and their own past history of trauma when they were kids as well. And so, you know, so you can see how the cycle, you know, goes round and around and around. And yeah, I think that in order for us to be able to sort of live through emotional pain and trauma, we're going to touch on some point at getting addicted to something, whether that's food, sex, alcohol, drugs, gambling,
wine, women, and song, right?
Workaholism.
That's true, yeah.
These little things right here, we got right here,
Right.
that's an addiction.
Yeah.
So, you know, addictions come in all shapes, sizes, and forms, and so there's a lot of shame attached to addiction, right? And so, and you know, the greatest substance that I believe that we use for dealing with trauma is alcohol. And alcohol is socially acceptable, and that's why so many people would say, well, why don't you just stop drinking? I go, well, I wish it was that simple and that easy, but it's not, you know. And then once you get addicted to whatever you're using, it's a difficult time to get yourself back, and a lot of us have to hit that proverbial rock bottom in order for us to, you know, make changes.
So 1989, even before that, 1986, the Flames, they went all the way to the final, lost to the Habs, and then 3 years later, your rookie season, you're getting a Stanley Cup ring.
Yeah.
You're thinking, this is easy. There's nothing to this, right?
Sure.
Hey, look, I'm going to get a whole bunch of rings. They're going to fill these fingers,
Yeah,
these hands, right?
absolutely.
But that wasn't the case. It was
No.
it was a long struggle, and
Yeah. Well, it's there's a reason why they call it the hardest trophy to win.
Right.
You know.
Now, were you drinking during that period of time as well?
I think I was at the beginning. You know,
Right.
it was socially acceptable. It was old time hockey, and, you know, and but you know, I think that experience, which is probably one of the greatest professional experiences, you know, I've had in my life. But you know, I can honestly say today that, you know, I would trade that Stanley Cup for the opportunity to get to work with people and help them in their most trying times, their most difficult times, their most desperate times. I really believe that the reason why I was put on the earth was to do the work that I'm doing today, and obviously all that hockey fame and success and all that allowed me to have a bigger voice than, say, most people. But you know, I think it's what you do with your pain, and eventually you come to the idea and to the realization that you need to find the gift in your pain, and when you find the gift in your pain, that's when you really can sort of meet people on a spiritual level, and when you do that, that's when you experience the greatest gains and experience the most amazing things.
So when was your rock bottom? When did you realize this is enough?
Well, let's see, it was about 13 and a half years ago. I had a fully loaded pistol in my mouth, ready to pull the trigger, and not necessarily because I wanted to die, but I was completely exhausted from living in emotional pain and suffering, and I'd tried everything possible on the planet, and you know, right at the moment of truth, when it was time for me to pull the trigger, I think it was pure divine intervention. A thought came across my head that said, you know, you've never quit anything in your life. Why are you quitting now? That allowed me to take the gun and throw it into the desert, and that's when the healing sort of started to happen naturally.
So how did you get that help? Like, who
I
did you
just
reach
reached out to a couple people that were close to me and said, hey, you know, I think it's time for me to make some changes, and I need some help, and not only that, I had 500 phone numbers in my Rolodex at that time, who I thought were all my friends, and I called them all individually, and I said, listen, I made a choice and I made a decision. I'm going to stop drinking, I'm going to stop doing drugs, and stop going to bars. So if that is your intention every time you call me, please lose my number. But if you'd like to come to my house, and I'll cook you a nice dinner, and for the first time in our relationship, we'll actually have a meaningful conversation. Mm-hmm. You know how many friends I got left? 2.
Wow.
2 of the 500,
That's amazing.
which was kind of a cool exercise to really sort of figure out who are the people that are really important to me, who are the people that truly love me unconditionally, and you know, those 2 friends of mine were guys that I leaned on heavily early on in my sobriety, and they were there to support me and love me, and you know, make sure that I stayed on the right path.
That's amazing. Now, you're originally from Oxbow, Saskatchewan, but you're raised in Manitoba.
Yeah.
You're a Siksika honorary chief, and you're Métis.
Yes.
That's
yes.
right. So did you find maybe some of that spirituality help you cope as a coping mechanism,
Oh, yeah.
and the healing process?
Yeah, there was no question that shortly after the first book came out, a lot of Aboriginal communities started to call and ask me to come and share my story on the communities. And what happened, and it happened very organically and naturally, was they started to invite me to spiritual ceremonies and sweat lodges and powwows and drumming and all that. And that's really where because I was like 5 years sober and my life was sort of flatlining, and I was like, if this is what sobriety is, then I don't want any part of it, right? And it wasn't until I started going to these Aboriginal communities and started participating in ceremony and smudging and meditation and all this stuff that, all of a sudden my life went to another spiritual level, and I really grasped onto the concept, and I was looking for a place to belong spiritually and sort of having a different kind of relationship with myself instead of beating myself up and thinking that I wasn't good enough and I wasn't lovable, that those people really taught me about self and the importance of taking care of myself and loving myself and forgiving myself and you know the deal, and I just felt comfortable. I didn't feel comfortable in the Catholic Church, or I didn't feel comfortable in Jehovah's Witness, because that's what I grew up with, right, was those two religions. My mom was Jehovah's Witness, my dad was Catholic, and although I do take bits and pieces of their beliefs and
so you open up the Bible and you get some inspiration as well?
and make them my own, because I have to fully understand that this is actually possible, this is doable, and yeah, so there's a lot of Buddhism, there's a lot of Aboriginal spirituality in my beliefs, there's some JW, there's some Catholic Church stuff, so, and that's what I tell people who are looking for spirituality, is that, I don't care what you believe in, but you have to believe in something.
So we've only got a couple of minutes left here, but what do you say to a young man or young woman that's going down the wrong path? You've seen it, you've been there yourself, drugs, cocaine, opioids, fentanyl, they're drinking lots of booze, they're going down the wrong. You take them aside one-on-one. What do you say to that person?
Well, first of all, they have to ask me for the help. I'm not just going to go in and say, you need to do this, 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 and this. The only thing I can talk about is my experience, my strength, and my hope. That's it. And if they get something out of that, great. But I'm not out promoting, spirituality. I'm not out there promoting religion. The only thing I can do is take care of myself, and I can only live a certain way. I have a daily spiritual routine that keeps me sober one day
and it keeps you on the right path
at a time. Yeah,
right. Okay.
And everybody's different. I'm sure yours is completely different than mine. But at the end of the day, I think it's all about, because left to my own defenses is absolute disaster. When I'm running my own life, it's a disaster. And I always say, the universe now drives the bus for me, and I sit in the passenger seat, and whatever stops he wants to make or wherever he wants to go, I don't question it anymore, because I know that it's part of my plan.
You've got another speaking engagement coming up October 3rd in Winnipeg. Tell me a bit about that.
Well, what we like to do is we like to have a big conversation with a big group of people, and we let them dictate where they want to go. So some of these speaking engagements, we deal with grief and loss, and then we deal with addictions, and we deal with mental health, and we deal with abuse, and so we let the audience.
What about face-offs or body checking?
No, none of that.
That's too bad.
That's long.
That's long gone.
That's a long time ago.
Now, something else people may not know about you: you're a country singer.
Yes.
And like me, you're a big Eagles fan, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Desperado.
Desperado.
That's
Yes.
it. And a quick story about Winslow, Arizona. What?
Yeah. So I was involved with this girl who lived in Phoenix, and we were living together in Santa Fe, and she decided that she didn't no longer want to be with me, and so I went after her because I wanted her back. And so I'm driving from Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I was living, to Phoenix, and I had no clue that Winslow, Arizona was on the route to Phoenix. And I was in a bad state. I was, drinking, doing drugs, driving down the road, and I see this sign for Winslow, Arizona, and then all of a sudden I remember that great Eagles.
Peaceful, easy feeling,
yeah, peaceful, easy feeling, and so I got out of my truck and I stood on the corner in Winslow, Arizona, and it was magic.
And now here you are in Lethbridge, Alberta.
Yes.
Theo Fleury, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your inspirational
Yeah,
story.
thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Former Stanley Cup champ with the Calgary Flames, Theo Fleury.